Hi everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which we've titled The Critical Cyber Skills Risk Leaders Are Missing. And this is presented in collaboration between the Risk Management Institute of Australasia and Risk to Solution. My name is Dan Condon, and I'm the Learning and Development Lead for the RMIA. And my role focuses on multiple facets of learning and development for the association, both in training and certification. I'd just like to start the session by acknowledging the traditional land in where I'm talking from, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land, both past, present, and emerging, and also any Aboriginal people that we have online today. So the purpose of this webinar is really an information session supporting our newly developed professional development offering, which we've titled Cyber Security Strategies for Risk Practitioners. That's a 4-hour intensive program on strategies in the cyberspace pertaining specifically to risk professionals. The pilot of this course is due to run on Tuesday, the 24th of June from 5 to 9 p.m. Australian Standard Eastern Time. So during the session, if you have any questions at all, please utilize the Q&A function of this platform. So that should be located just at the top of your screen under the title Q&A. If you just pop your questions in there, I will get to them throughout the session when appropriate. So to give a bit of background, the RMIA have a long history of partnering with industry experts to deliver professional development to our membership, and our partnership with Risk to Solution, which has been in place since 2023, is aimed to provide a wide scope of training programs across multiple areas of risk management, including short courses, higher education programs, and specifically focusing on their delivery of the graduate certificate and diploma in organizational resilience, risk, and high performance, which we run throughout the year in conjunction with Risk to Solution. So in our capacity as the professional body for risk management professionals in Australasia, it is our responsibility and duty to ensure that we are bringing quality and relevant training to the industry. Through our extensive knowledge of the risk landscape in Australia and in consultation with our memberships, cybersecurity and activities to counter threats have been identified as one of the biggest risks facing organizations today. One only has to think back to the vast array of highly publicized cyber breaches in current years to see the real life impacts of this emerging field. Through our consultation with our membership, we have identified a gap in our training portfolio delivery specifically relating to this topic. Once this gap was identified, we partnered with Risk to Solution to deliver this important piece of training to ensure our membership had access to the highest caliber of information and updates in this space. Risk to Solution are renowned for their broad knowledge of the challenges facing risk professionals and boards, specifically in their ability to bridge the gap and between strategy and operational response. Online today, we have two subject matter experts from Risk to Solution, Dr. Gav Schneider, who is the Group Chief Executive Officer of Risk to Solution Group, and Dave Cohen, the Deputy CEO. I'd like to thank them both for their time today, and I'd like to start by asking Dave what prompted the development of this course and how does it deliver the evolving needs to risk professionals through this training?
Thanks, Dan, and a really great privilege to be with you and all of you out there and to be working and partnering with the Risk Management Institute of Australasia to really bring this one-of-a-kind program to the industry. Just to give you a bit of background into why Risk to Solution and what gives us the ability to create this project. So for many years now, we've been developing bespoke and we're an IC2 official training partner for those of you within the cybersecurity realm. We've been creating bespoke cybersecurity programs for industry and organizations, both from a federal government and a state government level as well. So we really got a good understanding and a good idea of bridging that gap between breaking silos of risk professionals and cybersecurity professionals. You know, very often when I present at conferences and provide briefings, a standard question I always like to ask is, who in the room are risk professionals? And you get, depending on the type of conference that you're at, you get a handful of people putting their hands up. And the question I always ask is, you either drove here, you either walked here, or you took public transport to get here, but you certainly didn't sleep in this room last night, which means that you managed risk to get here. You didn't have a car accident. You didn't get knocked over by a car. You didn't fall under a bus, which means that you managed risk. And similarly, that goes into the cybersecurity realm. And just because we don't necessarily have cybersecurity in our title or in our job function or in our PD, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have a responsibility to understand cybersecurity domains. And once we break these silos of understanding that we may not be accountable for cybersecurity strategies in our organization, we're all responsible for the way cybersecurity is conducted in our organizations. And we kept hearing the same things from risk professionals. I know cyber is important, but I don't really know how to approach it. Cybersecurity has traditionally always been known as a very technical subject and very poorly understood by those non-technical individuals. So a lot of risk professionals felt out of those cybersecurity conversations and unsure how to contribute to them. So the easiest thing to do is just to stay out of them. But burying your head in the sand doesn't really address the problem, does it? Right? So what we did is we built this course to bridge that gap, to be able to give risk professionals and risk teams skills and language that they need to be able to engage meaningfully without needing to become technical experts. And I like to use the analogy: we most of us drive cars, most of us ride bicycles. We don't necessarily need to know how to fix the car. We don't need to necessarily know how to change brake pads or how to service the car to be able to use the car efficiently. But we do need to know certain things about the car, that it needs fuel, that it needs electricity, that it needs water, that it needs air in our tires, and to be able to efficiently run the car. So that generally is what, Dan, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely does. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess branching on from that question is, what ways would you say this program differs from traditional cybersecurity training programs also?
So I think what we've fallen prey to, and over the many cybersecurity programs that I've done in the past, is cybersecurity programs tend to focus on jargonized, militarized terminology, which often offsides a lot of non-jargonized, non-industry professionals with that cybersecurity, through that cybersecurity lens. So a lot of cybersecurity programs, in a nutshell, are traditionally built for IT teams. So, and have that really technical understanding. So this one is different. This one is, firstly, it's built in English. So when I say it's built in English, it's built in a language that we understand, a language that we use every single day. And you'll find that as you go through the course and as you go through the program, a lot of the concepts are very, very similar to basic fundamental risk management programs. And you'll start to draw parallels between, hold on, but I already know that, or hold on, that makes sense because I already do that. So linking that into the cybersecurity into the cybersecurity realm is an easy transition because it's delivered in a language that you understand. It's delivered in a language that we all can really relate to. And we really focus on real world application rather than the specific technical programs on how to assess cyber risks, map them to business objectives, track progress. It's a very practical course, leaving the less technical or the more technical stuff to the technical people and really focusing on that overarching piece of understanding how this affects the business as a whole.
Yeah, so really it's about aligning those knowledge areas to those day-to-day, you know, tasks that we all undertake in our roles and in a
Exactly.
practical way. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. And how would you say the course content aligns in terms of industry challenges and strategic objectives from a risk management perspective?
So I'm going to bring Gavin onto this to discuss this from a more strategic, overarching perspective, to give that lens from a global perspective as well, because it's very important that, when we start talking about risks and cyber risks, we're not only confined to the saltwater borders that we're working in on a daily basis. We're now talking about a far bigger picture because cybersecurity essentially knows no boundaries. But what we've done with this particular course is we've built the content around what's happening and what keeps risk and compliance teams up at night. things like regulatory pressure, third-party risks, business disruption. And it's really mapped to industry frameworks like ISO, like NIST, like the Essential Eight, to risk quantification frameworks, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later. And it teaches people how to apply these frameworks in a way that actually works inside of their organizations rather than just becomes a compliance tick and forget. But Gav, if I could just bring you on to this point as well, what are you seeing from a global perspective from that side?
Firstly, thank you for all of you who've jumped on to listen to us talk about something that we're all very passionate about, which is risk. And in the modern world that we all live in today, part of the challenge we've got is digitization is part of everything we do now. To the point that in all of our programs, those of you who've been following some of my work will remember we started talking about volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous nearly 10, 15 years ago. We've really had to include the digital now, where we talk about VUCAD, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and digital, because that digital component now affects all the others. It affects the volatility, it affects the uncertainty, it affects the complexity, and creates a ton of ambiguity for people who are not necessarily fluent in the tech world. So I recently returned from the RSA Archer conference in the US, which is one of the world's largest cyber conferences. About 40,000 people go to that. I was there last year too. And for those who do know me and have followed my work, you know me as the human-centric guy, not necessarily the cyber guy. But about 2020, based on our integrated risk and critical risk management consulting practice pieces from our consulting business, we found there's no way we could avoid bringing cyber into the equation. There's no way we could actually provide decent levels of risk advice without the digital component being factored into that. So that forced me actually to go back to university and get a grad cert in cybersecurity. I have to say I'm not a technical cyber guy, but it taught me that we need to be able to bridge the gaps. We need to be able to actually translate risk to cyber people, and cyber people need to be able to trust us enough to help them quantify and understand the real risk exposure. So the challenge that really exists today, and if we just look at a few real emerging and ongoing challenges. The first one, if we look at the CrowdStrike incident from last year, which was not a cyber attack. That could actually come down to operational resilience or an operational resilience failure. But realistically, it cost billions across the world and shut down aviation sectors for an extended period of time and caused untold damage. Then we talk about there's so many breaches, it really doesn't matter which one we bring up. But whether it's Optus or I'm sure there's been another one or two today, if you just Google it, this is happening to us all the time. The challenge we've had is that up until really recently, the focus has been on technical cyber solutions. Okay, we have a problem with phishing. So let's actually see if we can implement better firewalls and a bit of training and education for people to not click on links and not get fooled by phishing type attempts. The challenge we've got with that is it's highly reactive, and most of the challenges we actually face now are not purely technical. Yeah, we're also seeing significant changes in the way technical cyber is being managed. Okay, generative AI in the mix is changing things dramatically. If I look at RSA last year, every exhibitor had AI enabled, AI inside. We're using AI as part of our dev. And that literally ranged from, when you have a conversation with somebody potentially saying, oh yeah, I use ChatGPT for the code, to hold on a second, we've got smart, ongoing, iterative learning here. And this is a lifetime ability for us to scale the equivalent of, what 400 security operations center people would do. So the difference was really big. I go back to a month ago, you almost saw none of that. AI is now inbuilt, and it's not a differentiator. Focus on what's coming next, quantum. It's going to change the game. So part of the way we actually look at this is that this is an ongoing and continuous change challenge. Because of the fact that most of what we do is now digitized and it's digital interaction, so many of our business processes, our continuity focus, and to be honest, our frontline risk exposure sits in the digital domain. So as a risk leader and a risk professional, at the very least, you need a layer of fluency where you can't get bamboozled by cyber experts who hit you with so much jargon that it's so confusing that you sit there and go, okay, I better just give you what you want, or you're telling me this is an incredibly high risk. I don't understand it, so I'll have to agree with your assessment as the expert. We've come a long way. And one of the things that I found very encouraging was the work we've been doing with the FAIR Institute, the Factor Analysis for Information Risk out of the US, who they were the innovators with the world's first open standard on cyber risk information quantification. And, you know, Dave mentioned we'll talk about this. We will, because cyber quantification is arguably one of the critical components for any risk activity. If you can't quantify it and measure it, how do we know if it's actually risky or not? So the ability to actually put some metrics and some structure to this is crucial. But if I look at the last year or two, man, that has grown in leaps and bounds. And, you know, it's gone from 10 years ago where this FAIR model was a very manual process of looking at how this stuff works to now automated lifetime software doing this for organizations. So the challenge we've got now is, as a risk professional, we're seeing cyber professionals understand now that they have to understand risk and be able to talk risk at board level, but we're seeing risk professionals not do the same on cyber. So you need to be able to understand the fundamentals. You do not have to be a technical cyber expert, but you need to be able to understand just the most basic ideas of how do we quantify the risk? How do we understand when somebody's talking about network or endpoint security versus them talking about firewalls or password protection, just so that we can actually help them to be able to quantify and measure and manage the risk. So bottom line is, if you want to be a robust, competent, capable, rounded risk expert, and you don't have the digital cyber componentry in your arsenal, you're leaving a lot at the table. And if we look at roughly, let's just thumbsuck, you know, 80% of business dependency being based on digital infrastructure and connectivity, and that's probably low, because realistically, most businesses actually need about 99% of connectivity, uptime, and digital availability to work. This is still a massive risk area. We'll talk about evolving trends a little bit further, but I hope that answers the question and shares a bit of insight from the last year or two.
Yeah, it absolutely does, especially when we're talking about how this course approaches the insufficient, I guess, skill gaps that we have in industry that need to be covered, and, you know, what a role that cyber resilience piece plays in an organization's overall risk strategy as well. So, I guess a question for both around the course specifically: how does the course integrate strategic objectives in terms of implementing them into tactical operations to enhance cyber resilience? What are the kind of practical takeaways from that?
I think it's going to be first in best dress. Gab, do you want to start with that, and I'll carry on?
You go, Dave.
So essentially what we've done is we've actually trademarked the term stactical, right? Which is the alignment of strategic drivers of the organization with tactical operations. So gone are the days where we've got a linear hierarchical system in the organization where you've got a start point, you've got a defined endpoint, and you've got a system of processes to follow to get from one point to the next. The world is too complex. Our environments are too complex. They're too ambiguous. We've got things happening all over the show. We've got knock-on effects happening. We've got wicked problems happening all over the show. The effect of one thing has another effect on something else. So we need to be able to understand and how to align these things. And for those of you that have read Jocko Willick's book, Extreme Ownership, they talk about this concept of mission command. And what mission command essentially is empowering your frontline operators to make decisions that are happening on the front line aligned to the strategic objectives of the overall mission. So this is what we want to be doing in organizations as well. We don't just want the boardroom setting policies and procedures and forcing them down on the front line to implement. What we really want to be doing is we want to create a balance between the two. Because if we're just pushing policy down that isn't pragmatic for your frontline to be able to be able to carry out on, then what you've got is you've got a bunch of paperwork that's only really written and read by the person that wrote it. So what we need is the strategic objectives to be aligned to what's really going on in the front line. But more importantly, we need the front line to actually adopt, buy in, and have skin in the game with what's going on from a strategic level, so that we can operate more efficiently in an environment that is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and digitalized, as Gav mentioned earlier, that's fluid, that's changing all the time. Otherwise, we just get hamstrung with bureaucracy, we get hamstrung with red tape, and we're not able to make effective decisions, which slows down growth, which slows down opportunity, which misses opportunity, which essentially inhibits our ability to thrive through disruption.
Maybe just to add a little bit more meat to that. I totally agree, Dave. Nicely summarized. But let's think about this practically. Right? More and more risk teams are responsible for risk culture at some level within their organization. Technically, we should be owning it if we are the risk drivers and the risk leaders in our business. But if we want to define the idea of risk culture, it's an alignment around appetite, tolerance, and behaviors. So people are not making decisions that are out of appetite or tolerance, and they're behaving according to the way the organization requires them to achieve the objectives. So there's lots of variations to that. But practically, think about your role as a risk leader or risk manager or risk advisor in your organization. If you can't enable your frontline cyber practitioners, your IT team, to understand appetite and tolerance and help you articulate that to the rest of the organization, we're never going to have a robust culture. And if we think back to the old adage, which is really accurate still, you are only as strong as your weakest link. So you might have the most robust risk appetite and tolerance pieces. You might have the most robust risk assessment and management componentry. You might have bought the best software to manage your risk business continuity. And you might even be, mature in terms of the way you're rolling out ERM. So you're at the top of the food chain, right? You're nailing this stuff. The challenge we go is if you look at the architecture and infrastructure of your business, if the people who are providing the digital enablement, the digital security, and the continuity of those functions don't understand risk, you've got a challenge. And equally, if you can't relate and understand them, it's hard to link it together. So I don't think cyber is that different to many other specialized risk domains. Like WHS is a good example. There was a period not so long ago where risk managers did not touch anything to do with workplace health and safety. And that was the domain of a work health and safety expert, who arguably were just risk managers, right? Focusing on one specific area of risk. We've seen the same evolution with cyber. It's been something that's been dominated by technical cyber people to date. It's changing. More and more, if I look at US and European trends, more and more you're seeing the rise of the non-technical CISO. You're seeing integration of chief risk officer and CISO roles. And part of those challenges then come back to you can't manage what you don't understand. So you don't have to be the technical cyber expert, but you need to make sure you can talk the language, understand where the real vulnerabilities sit, not the vulnerabilities that are often promoted by vendors in the cyber game. Because if you have anybody trying to sell you anything in cyber, they will create a picture that makes you so scared you never want to get on your computer. And they'll make you feel like every single second there's thousands of attempts to get into your website, get into your emails, and breach your system. The fact that you're on a webinar, we're on a webinar, and we haven't been breached yet, actually tells us that most of the time our security is workable. The fundamental challenge we've got, once we look at the security mindset versus, let's call it something more benign, like credit risk, which might take slightly longer for us to see that we've got a problem in credit risk. Cyber is really quick because we've got nation state actors, we've got criminal syndicates, we've got terrorist organizations, and you've just got bored or disgruntled internal employees, or just some kid who decides he wants to be a hacker today, who are all out there looking to perpetrate attacks. So the big challenge with cyber compared to many other risk domains, and Dave mentioned that early on, is that it doesn't have the same traditional boundaries or protection mechanisms that we've used to secure or protect other structures. So if we want to take the risk lens to cyber, we have to understand how fast it's moving. And you can't do that unless you're able to build rapport, build connection, and understand what cyber teams are dealing with every day in a way that you can translate back to a board, back to your organization, back to your structure so they can make great decisions. So part of the challenge with this is not going away for the next short term. I believe there's probably a future, who knows when it will come, where large vendors, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, will ensure that as long as you're using their products, your ecosystem is secure. The challenge we've got is, as mentioned, there are literally millions of stakeholders looking at how to break those every time someone comes up with a fix or a patch. So for your perspective, cyber risk is actually a really cool place to play. It's so fast paced, it's evolving really quickly, and it needs risk experts to actually come in, translate, help, and support. So just from a career growth perspective, it's worth adding the skill set to your arsenal for nothing else other than making yourself a better risk manager and risk leader.
But
Thanks, Dan.
But I think, Gab, also just to touch on that point and just to add to that point, because we're living in a world that is so digitalized, this doesn't only apply to the workplace. This doesn't only apply to your role as a risk professional, right? Everything that we do, we're on mobile devices, we're on computer screens, we're interacting in airports. I've literally seen people conducting internet banking in an airport on free Wi-Fi. Now, to someone from the cyber industry, it causes me significant cognitive dissonance because I understand the risks that are associated with that. But these aren't only skills and tools that will apply to yourself as a professional. These will apply to yourself in your personal life and your digital life as well, not only in the workplace when you're sitting behind a work computer. So we face risk every single day of our life. Every time we open up our door, open up our eyes, we start facing risks from the time we get out of bed. Slip, trip, using it, whatever we're doing, we're facing risk. So adapting and understand these risks. I was having a conversation with my sister-in-law. She's a beautician around cybersecurity, and now she understands the importance of multi-factor authentication, and she understands why it's important for her to have multi-factor authentication. So it's important to not only silo this discussion as to how does this apply to my role in my paying job, but how does this actually apply to my life as well, and more about that.
Yeah, definitely a good point. So I do encourage everyone to keep asking questions. We have just had one come through that I will ask now, and it's from Matthew asking, how does resilience apply specifically in the context of cyber risk?
Love it. I'll jump in with that one, Dave. So Matthew, firstly, if you're asking the question, you're making me very happy. Thank you. I hope you bought the book, or at the very least have been following some of our work. But realistically, part of the challenge with the cyber domain is that every access point is potentially a vulnerability. And that's what often cyber practitioners will bang on about. They'll go, hey, if you connect to the internet, if you plug a device in, if you're on your phone, etc., you're very vulnerable. The challenge we've really got with this is the resilience mindset is actually a combination of compliance, resilience, and presilience as a package to get high performance. So from a compliance perspective, cyber has actually come a long way. Even if we look at Australia's Essential 8 as a simplistic framework just for us to map to, before you get into NIST or 27,000 or some of the more complex and difficult cyber certifications to get, we need to make sure we are trying to be as proactive as possible. And that's a really tough thing to do in a game that's changing so quickly. So one of the things we found, particularly with cyber, is it's a mindset thing more than anything else. And if you look at your cyber risk treatment structure, you need to have some things that are compliance. In other words, everybody must not do X or Y. And we actually can't be ambiguous about that. The good news is it's so easy to pin that to Essential 8 or any other standard, which will give you that information. But then we need the resilience pieces. And this is where I think risk experts can help a lot, because cyber resilience has actually been dumbed down to the point that it's more got to do with data storage and backups. When we think about resilience as risk experts, we're thinking about an ecosystem, right? We're thinking about how do we ensure our organization keeps going, just not one component of the organization. And that's where the switch into resilience starts to come, where our ability to actually build the right mindset to be able to thrive through disruption and have high performance during business as usual. And I'll give you a really good example there. Let's look at the adoption of generative AI into your organization. Now, some stakeholders will go, that's not cyber. We're going, well, is it digital? Is it software? Is it plugging into that digital infrastructure? And is it data sharing? And you go tick, 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 tick. So you're going, cool, this is a cyber piece. right? So if we started to look at that, by understanding some of these components, you can risk manage the adoption of new tech within your business better, or within your team better. So the resilience piece is the glue in the oil. It's actually the piece that makes this all work well. But ultimately, the starting point with that is familiarity. It's a great question, Matthew. I'm more than happy to take that offline too a little bit later. I could go on about that one for at least another hour, but I know we've got more stuff to talk about. Thank you.
We do. Thank you, Matthew. So I guess now drilling down into the content of the course specifically and what people will get out of it. Um, could you, either one of you, elaborate on the key modules of the course, and how they relate specifically to the course learning outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off with that one. Just to give a bit of context, right, as to what is presilience for those of you that are on the call that don't really understand what presilience is. So without reading all 300 odd pages of the book and taking you through a tactical skills program, a grad cert and a grad dip, presilience is an opportunity. There's the book. It's an opportunity-centric, proactive methodology of managing risk, right? Of leading the way we lead our lives. And it's built on the foundations of compliance. Do what you have to do, because if you don't, you're going to land up in trouble. Resilience, when compliance breaks or when we don't have compliance in place, how do we bounce back to business as usual? But who wants to keep being reactive and responsive? We want to get ahead of the curve. We want to be proactive. How do we get ahead? And that opportunity-centric, proactive approach is what resilience is really all about in a very small nutshell. So, Dan, to your point and to your question that you raised, what are the actual nitty-gritties of the module? So what we're doing is quite simple. We're running a program on understanding cybersecurity from a risk professional lens, right? How we're doing it is very different, and why we're doing it we discussed a little bit earlier. But the how is critically important. So we can have all of these concepts and we can explain to you what, and going into some of the modules, are what some of the frameworks are. Which would be the NIST framework, which would be the ISO framework, which would be the Essential 8 framework. We go into cyber risk quantification a little bit, discussing various methodologies on factor analysis for information risk, understanding what the deep dark web is all about. Not necessarily going into the nitty-gritties of that, but that's all great, right? How to conduct a risk assessment, a cybersecurity assessment, how to put together a calendar, how to put together a remediation plan, understanding all of these types of things, and we go into this. But unless we know what to do with this information, unless we develop some of the core skills and the critical skills required, such as critical thinking, situational awareness, directive effective communication, situational awareness, emotional intelligence, priming and framing, all of these types of skills, unless we understand what we're going to do with this information once we've got it, then what's the point of telling you about it, right? So it's very important to take not only those critical skills that we speak about in the program, and I touched on a few of them earlier, but it's really taking those concepts, breaking them down into pragmatic applications, and then we also bolt on the key functionality and the key concepts of resilience on how to apply them. So it really is a well-rounded course. So what you aim to get out of the course and when you get there is you're certainly not going to become a cyber professional. You're certainly not going to be able to be an individual that can run a security operations center or run an effective incident response exercise. But what you are going to be able to do is you're going to be able to sit around the table and have a discussion and understand what's going on with other cyber professionals. Gav, basically, as the founder of the resilience concept, do you want to maybe elaborate on why those skills are so critically important to the what?
Sure, Dave. And I see some more questions coming in, so I'll be quick on this one. Practically for us, every day you're going to be exposed to, okay, are we Essential 8 compliant? Or if, for example, you work in risk in a critical infrastructure organization, you have to actually meet some level of compliance with a recognized framework. So understanding the frameworks is pretty important and pretty useful. But equally, the understanding is one thing, the ability to use that knowledge to manage risk is the critical piece. Because we can get compliance ticks quite easily. And you can often get compliance by having the policies in place, buying the software, implementing a few programs, and doing a bit of education. But whether it works or not, that's a different story. And I might even link that to a question that I see has just popped up, if that's okay, Dan, from Michael Smith, who's asked, what do organizations get right when it comes to cyber and risk alignment? Because, Dave, I think that's a good segue, because that's more or less what we're trying to focus on with this program. We're not trying to take you into, here's your crash course in 4 hours, you will be, a certified cyber risk professional. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did. It's much the same that you can't attend a 4-hour risk management workshop and expect to be a risk expert. What we're hoping to do, though, with the program, as Dave mentioned, is to demystify some of the jargon, give you the skills to be able to relate, translate, and interact with cyber and risk professionals, and understand how to capitalize on the opportunities that come from linking a bit of knowledge on cybersecurity with risk management. And there are plenty. So to answer the question directly, from Michael's perspective, what does good look like? It does depend on your organization structure and view. There is no, in my experience at least, there's no one perfect picture where you go, if you just adopt this model in your organization, you will be the most secure, most risk ready, and most resilient organization. It's different from organization to organization. So I have occasionally seen good examples of enterprise-wide risk management with cybersecurity plugged under the enterprise risk management system, translated in a way that it's measured generically with the metrics, and most of this needs a robust technology platform to enable that to happen. It's quite unlikely you'll achieve that just by using spreadsheets with a little bit of off-the-shelf stuff. That's the one side. But on the other hand, we've consulted and worked with some small and medium businesses who don't look at enterprise risk management. They look at their critical risks. They look at the things that will hurt them, and they focus on those. And we're still in an era where cyber risk is a critical risk for almost every business, but absolutely for most small and medium businesses, because they can't afford the IT support or the dedicated cybersecurity manager or the dedicated risk manager. And some of you who work in portfolio type roles might actually be serving as risk manager or risk lead or risk advisor to several small businesses or several small business divisions. So part of what we've got to do is fit this back in. So if good on the large end of town looks like integrated enterprise risk management with cyber as an enabler for all risk to be managed well, and risk as an enabler for cyber to be able to be managed well, that's what good looks like there. But in a small business, it's about fit for purpose. It's about what can you afford based on your limited structures and what would help you. In other words, often getting a cyber structure right might actually be as simple as buying new Microsoft tools and turning all the security settings up as high as you can get them. They're buying an off-the-shelf cyber policy structure and then converting it to your small business and then making sure it's applied. And that actually might be adequate protection for a small to medium-sized business, whereas it probably wouldn't be enough for a more complicated business. So there's a lot more to that, but I hope that answers the question a little.
Thanks, Gav. We've also had a question from Gary, which is how will the course differentiate someone in their career who's already got certifications like CISSP or traditional risk qualifications?
So a great question, and thanks for asking the question, Gary. So CISSP and other traditional risk quals and experience is fantastic. So there will be aspects, short sections of the program that, yeah, I know that, yeah, I know that, yeah, I know that. But sometimes we actually have to zoom out to zoom in. So it's not necessarily about the nitty-gritties and the specifics. The way this program is designed is to connect the dots and to start breaking down the silos between traditional silos within the organization, so that we're developing the ability, and through the Presilience methodology and through the Presilience concept. So one thing that CISSP doesn't teach you is a cyber risk quantification, for example. So you can lead and manage a cyber team effectively, but if we don't know how that relates to the business and the impact that that all has on the business and other effects of the business and the humans within the business, we're falling short of what's really important to implement effective and meaningful change. To Gav's point that he mentioned earlier, Maintaining high performance through business as usual is what a lot of organizations actually do very well. But we don't live in an environment where business as usual is the norm. We live in an environment where disruption is the norm. So to take the CISP certifications with the traditional risk management quals and expertise, we've now got a situation where you've got a ton of experience and knowledge in that. You've got another ton of experience and knowledge in that. But how does that translate into a bigger picture and ambidextrous environment in a networked world in which we're operating in? So the course really takes those dots, joins them together. And, a lot of this is about sense making and meaning making, right? Sense making is understanding what we're doing, and meaning making is essentially understanding why we're doing it. And the ability to translate the two and understand the two is the key differentiator. And in my opinion, the course may exist, but I've never seen it out there before. And that's on a global platform.
Right. Well, we're getting towards the end of our time. So I guess my final question, and the question we'd want everyone to come away from this from, is what are the key takeaways you hope participants will gain from this course holistically?
So I'll start off with the nuts and the bolts, and then Gav, from a bigger picture, I might ask you to jump in over there. So from the nuts and the bolts, specifically, we're looking for emotional intelligence. We're looking for the ability to conduct a cyber risk assessment. We're looking to be able to understand the cyber domain as a risk domain, understand what cybersecurity means to the business, understand how it impacts and influences all other parts of the business just as much as the risk domain does. And to Gav's point that he mentioned earlier, to demystify some of these dark, scary, hairy concepts that we tend to shy away from. What we don't want to be doing is stop driving cars because cars are getting too fast. What we want to be doing is develop better braking systems. So what we're doing is we're developing ourselves and creating a better braking system within ourselves, not to slow things down, but in order to manage our risks more effectively. That is ultimately what we want to be doing. So this program, when we were putting it together, I was really, really excited because it takes not only the technical aspects of the program, but what that means in the broader context of the organization. And again, I have these conversations with people all the time, is where do you want to be in the organization? Do you want to be moving closer to the boardroom, or do you want to be moving further away from the boardroom? If you want to be moving further away from the boardroom, then super specialize, hyper specialize in technical domains and silo yourself in one particular place, because we need those people. We need technical specialists. We need the nuts and the bolts people. We want them. If that's you, great, no problem. Get as many certifications, get as much experience as you can in those technical areas, and that will suit you well. But if you want to grow and progress and become leaders within the organization and across multiple domains in the organization, we need multiple skill sets. We need to understand multiple domains. And that's exactly what this program will give you.
I don't have too much to add to that, other than the world is changing faster than we can keep up. And this is a domain that you already should have had skills or understanding of a few years ago. And we want to make sure that the risk fraternity, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, is not left behind, and we remain leaders as we have been. So please jump in and make sure you've covered the skill sets to thrive in the modern world, and don't feel that you're lost or have to get an expert in every time somebody wants to talk to you about cyber risk. Thanks.
Brilliant. Well, we've just hit 12:45, so we will wrap things up now, but I believe there is a slide up on screen at the moment that does give you information on how to register for the cybersecurity strategies and for risk professionals course. As I mentioned, it is running online, so it's running over 2 sessions on Tuesday, the 24th of June and Thursday, the 26th of June. From 5 to 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. There is a QR code on your screen now to register. Otherwise, you can visit the RMIA website, where you will attain member discounts being an RMIA member. I'd like to thank both Gav and Dave for their time this afternoon. I think it's been a really great session, and I'd like to thank the wider Risk to Solution team for putting this session together. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We will be sending a post-session follow-up email with all this information as well. But thank you all for attending.